Welcome to students, faculty, alumni, and friends to the University of Minnesota Law School's Matheson Lecture in Corporate Governance. I am William McGeverin. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and it is wonderful to see so many of you here today. This lecture series was established by Dean Matheson, member of the class of 2008, and Diana Matheson. The series honors the work of Dean's father, Minnesota law professor John Matheson, who is the Law Alumni Distinguished Professor of Law. And in particular, it highlights the work of our corporate institute here, which John founded. I want to say thank you to Dean and Diana for your thoughtful gift and for joining us virtually today from California. Welcome. And welcome to all the members of Professor Matheson's family and his friends who could join us. Welcome family members Judy and Jack and Stuart. We're thrilled you could be here today for this important event. As many of you know, Minnesota Law's Corporate Institute is led by Executive Director Kiri Sommermeyer, as well as Professor Matheson and Professor Kristen Hickman. The Corporate Institute that John founded combines the strengths of an internationally recognized business law faculty with a vibrant Twin Cities business community, home to Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies, and a robust entrepreneurship scene filled with those who hope to be Fortune 1000 companies someday. Programming at the Institute prepares students for successful business careers and leadership positions, and it pairs world-class professionals with law students to leverage experience, learning, and creativity. It is one of the places where our law school really embodies its mission of integrating strong intellectual rigor with skillful practice. Initiatives like the Corporate Fellowship Program, the Business Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic, the Corporate Externship, and the JD MBA degree program with the Carlson School of Management, along with, of course, programming and events like this one here today, all combine to make the Corporate Institute a really dynamic engine to bring the business and legal worlds together. So here at Minnesota Law, we believe that we have a responsibility to convene the community, locally and globally, to address the leadership and governance challenges of this time. Today, in To Speak or Not to Speak, Balancing Corporate Interests and Pressures in External Communications, we will hear from an exceptional leader who has used her own Minnesota law training both to help businesses thrive and to advance the values she lives by. We are honored to have our alum and friend Michelle Miller, class of 1986, former Vice President, Chief Counsel, Employment Law at Medtronic, with us today. Welcome, Michelle. At Medtronic, Michelle was responsible for addressing workplace legal, policy, immigration, and employee relations issues, and for providing appropriate legal guidance and resources for senior management. She also led the Medtronic Law Department DEI initiative and served on the Reputation Issues Management team there. Prior to entering law school, Michelle had already been a teacher, a counselor, a college administrator, and had worked within human resources. In addition to being a graduate of the nation's finest law school, Michelle also had, why? What's funny? That's not funny. Michelle has a BA from Indiana University and a master's from Southern Methodist University. Michelle has a long history of devoted community service, mentorship, and leadership in DEI, career development, and workplace matters. She served on Minnesota Law's Board of Advisors, including as its chair, and she currently serves as co-chair of the law school's Alumni Board, an organization focused on women who have graduated from, yes, the greatest law school in the United States. In the community, she currently serves as a board member on the Abbott Northwestern Hospital Foundation and the Twin Cities Diversity in Practice Board. Michelle is also a member of the Executive Leadership Council, a nationally recognized organization of African American executives, and the NBA CLS Corporate Council. Michelle's service and work have been recognized with so many awards, including, just to name a few, the Minnesota Lawyers Legacy Award, the Profiles in Courage Award for the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, and the Medtronic Lifetime Achievement Legacy Honor. She has also been recognized as one of the top 100 most influential Blacks in corporate America. Welcome back to Minnesota Law, Michelle. We're so honored to have you here today. Now, come in. Before I turn over the mic to Michelle, I have 3 quick logistical notes. First, Michelle has reserved some time for Q&A following her remarks. There are microphones on either side of the aisle here where you can go to ask your questions so that everyone, including our friends joining us on live stream, will be able to hear you. Second, I of course want to thank our spectacular staff for all the work that went into organizing today's event. Please join me in expressing our gratitude to them. And third, and arguably most important, I want to make sure everyone knows you are all invited to our reception following the lecture in Auerbach Commons, which is right upstairs on the main floor of Mondale Hall near the main entrance. So please join us then. And now, let's all give Michelle a big round of applause, welcoming her back to Minnesota Law.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you to Professor Matheson and Dean McGovern for this very kind invitation to share my thoughts about the challenges, pressures on organizations and corporations to make corporate statements on public events. I appreciate your kind words, and I do feel like I'm back home. Welcome to you, audience, and thank you for coming and for joining me as we all are going to be facing this turbulent season, politically, environmentally, and culturally. But first, I have to tell you, I never anticipated I would be on this side of this room. I never imagined that. It looks different from here. Yeah, it's okay, yes, yes. And Rich Meyer and I used to sit right back up there and figure out what kind of devilment we could make. It is a bit intimidating, but you know, life turns and comes unexpectedly full circle. Fairly early in my career with Medtronic, I was invited to speak at St. Olave's Faith and Work Breakfast series. For over 30 years, Medtronic has had a global all-employee holiday party at which the Christmas story, Luke 2nd chapter, 1-20, was read from the Bible by a longtime employee, Earl Hatton. Several patients, their families, and physicians also told their stories of faith, health, and healing. Linked, of course, to the application of Medtronic devices and therapies. As Medtronic grew increasingly diverse, many employees expressed concerns about having such a strong impact and focus on the Christian story. In an effort to be inclusive, we began to focus on faith and healing and included employee representatives from several other cultures to share meaningful passages related to their celebrations. St. Olave's question to me was, how did you do this sensitive and successful change? So, as an introduction, I said, these situations are complex. To be honest, working with a corporation is a bit like making sausage. If you knew what was in it and how it was made, you might not want any. I then explained the factors and guidelines for consideration that were the underpinnings of our actions. Well, that was on Friday. On Saturday, the Star Tribune published an article. Headline, Hard Questions on Breakfast Menu. Corporate executive says, corporations operate like sausage. If you saw it being made, you wouldn't want any. On Monday, of course, I was summoned by the VP of Communications. Michelle, what are you doing? What? A great corporation like Medtronic is sausage? She was supremely offended. Intense flogging commenced. Fast forward. As I interviewed some members of senior management for today's presentation, I heard many similar stories about C-suite executives who stepped out into a communications landscape that has now rapidly changed with much more serious issues, greater risks, and more severe impacts. In today's fast-paced, interconnected world, corporations are increasingly being called upon to take a stance on a wide range of political, social, environmental, and cultural issues, from climate change to racial justice, from gender equality to immigration policy. The issues that companies are being asked to weigh in on are multifaceted and complex. In the words of Tarad Neptune, Medtronic Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer, this is perhaps the most challenging time in the history of modern business to be a publicly traded global company against the backdrop of the most complicated geopolitical situation since World War II. Business has to wrestle with how to align its interests and with the competing interests of an increasingly sophisticated and vocal set of stakeholders, including employees who want conflicting things. So how did we get here, though? Because this has been a rapidly developing evolution. Until the early 2000s, corporations generally avoided political, tragic event, or social justice public commentary. However, with increasing access to high-speed internet sources of information or misinformation, social media, generational differences in work philosophies, and expectations of trusted corporate families, corporations have assumed or been forced to support or influence and advocacy roles in the public marketplace. According to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School research, in the last 15 years, companies have been under tremendous pressure to address specifically the social justice and environmental issues. The 2020 murder of George Floyd was a pivotal event driving an increased expectation of corporate statements and commitments to improving the social and cultural fabric of our lives. Those commitments were often financial. Employees, consumers, shareholders, customers, investors, and various communities are now looking for greater transparency and authenticity. Younger generations, LGBTQ plus adults, adults of color, have even higher expectations for supportive corporate public statements. At the center of the current social debates, these communities are most impacted by public policy or societal changes. By 2023, unique events such as the January 6th riots, gun violence, the Dobbs Supreme Court decision, and the Israeli-Gaza war intensified the presumption of the necessity for corporate statements. Invasive social media, such as TikTok, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, WeChat, and Twitter X, have politicized the common discussions of everyday life. Polarization has surged in workplaces and in families. With the exception of X, each of these platforms has over 1 billion followers. The dissemination of opinion, information, and misinformation is instantaneous. Here's the sentiment. I feel so fortunate to have disinformation at my fingertips. How many of you have thought that? Or thought you had real information, only to find out that it was disinformation? The reality is that employee perspectives are not singular nor consistent inside and outside their reference point. Corporate statements don't and can't represent all stakeholders, all opinions, or all eventualities. The rise of incivility, abusive behavior, and relationship uncertainty in the workplace, consumer and customer political retribution, and shareholder operational challenges have created a quagmire around whom the corporate communications represent and on what basis. Bob Ryan, former CFO of Medtronic, speaks of the pressures on today's corporations to meet expectations of highly vocal and overtly partisan constituencies. Senior management, specifically the CEO, is tasked with making the best assessment of the circumstances and being the voice of the corporation. There is no formula nor recipe. The downside risk of a miscalculation can be huge. In addition to the impact on employees and culture, the political, financial, and reputational damage can be significant and long-lasting. And so we see. Okay, this does not like me. Oh, there we are. All right. So you recognize all of these names, and undoubtedly you know. Chick-fil-A, a well-established, ultra-conservative, family-owned fast food restaurant, was very open about its religious beliefs and anti-LGBTQ plus values. However, it subsequently touted its commitment to DEI in the workplace. Chick-fil-A has now drawn severe criticism from conservatives for having a corporate policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for appointing an executive to head those efforts, whom they subsequently released. Bud Light, a trans influencer, posted support of a Bud Light contest on her Instagram account, where she has 1.8 million followers. Certain conservative commentators and celebrities have incited a boycott, and the sales have plummeted. Target, right here at home, you've read it. For more than 10 years, Target, the retailer, has had displays and merchandise for Pride Month, the annual celebration for LGBTQ Americans in June. After an organized backlash from far-right groups, it has removed its Pride displays from many stores. This is serious business. We all read these things in the newspaper and we see what they're talking about, but we really don't necessarily understand the impact on this country and how we operate. The fundamental question is how to avoid this significant miscalculation or lessen its impact. There are no guarantees. The business must balance the interests of all their stakeholders, including employees, using an objective and consistent approach. This requires the proactive creation of a framework and strategy that can be activated quickly as the issues come forward. A balanced determination can be achieved by a multidimensional analysis that helps the leadership team arrive at decisions that have internal consistency and alignment with corporate values, priorities, as well as delineated levels of business risk. Harvard professor of management Bill George suggests that the goal of the framework is to help companies navigate the balance between corporate responsibility and political neutrality. An important step in building this framework is the development of an objective structure that includes functional representatives who understand the operation and the policies of the company as well as its core culture. Only 31% of Fortune 500 companies have a consistent process for making a decision on the nature of internal or external communications. Gravity Research Corporate Insider Survey reports that 88% of these prepared companies use a cross-functional task force to evaluate issues in a consistent and authentic way. Generally, this task force membership includes communications, government affairs, human resources, DEI, legal, compliance operations, and sales where appropriate. Brad Lehrman, EVP, Chief Legal Officer of Starbucks, notes that it is crucial to determine who makes the final decision on a public statement or commitment, who analyzes that data and potential impacts, and who resolves conflicts of interest. This should be consistent with current company practices. Typically, senior management is responsible for risk management. The board of directors is charged with oversight of those decisions and recommendations. These checks and balances are particularly important in these times of nuanced, diverse opinions. There are also concerns about who actually speaks. Who is the face of the corporation? The Edelman Trust Barometer research found that 54% of employees actually globally believe that the CEO should speak publicly on controversial political and social issues. According to Chief, a networking group for senior executive women, 9 out of 10 C-suite leaders are very hesitant to take a public stance on current issues. The repercussions can be severe and, dare I say, career-limiting. Tripwire Interactive LLC, a video company, issued a public apology and announced that the CEO was stepped down after making spontaneous anti-abortion comments. Raw politics exacerbates the tenuous positions of the company. Cynthia Clark, professor of management at Bentley University, cautions the heightened cultural tensions that have put marketers under pressure aren't going anywhere. You need to have a very thoughtful approach to speaking out because what's happening right now in this moment is when you speak out, you may be entering into a culture war. We have red and blue states. Are we going to have red and blue companies? A key framework development exercise is called stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping is a tool that's used to identify and prioritize key stakeholders who may be affected by a company's decision. Companies can create a stakeholder map to assess the interests, influence, and relationships between and among different stakeholders. By understanding the perspectives and concerns of differing stakeholders, companies can tailor their messaging and communication strategy to address their expectations or decide not to. A prepared corporation will identify the stakeholders, their respective behaviors, and their differences. Global, local employees, both management and operations, customers, consumers, shareholders, media, business partners, investors, patients, policymakers. For example, in terms of difference, many younger employees care more about their company's impact on the world than the traditional measures of success. That's been actually supported by research. Fascinating. We were talking earlier, the dean and I, about the difference in the younger generation that are attending law school. Certain business partners have concerns about reputational impact on companies with whom they have relationships. Blowback is not popular. People are going to be, and corporations are going to be very careful. Globalization enhances the bandwidth and the depth of business opportunities, yet it also exposes the organizations to an increased panoply of social and political risks worldwide. So this is a story. A senior executive from a global U.S. company traveled to Dubai for a sales meeting. She met a sales rep who had returned to work to sell his products the day after the strikes on Gaza. He returned to his office only to read a memo from the global CEO, whose group included employees from both sides of the conflict. It said, "We stand with Israel." His very next call notified him that his entire family of more than 20 members were killed in that first strike. They all lived in Gaza in one building. He stood sobbing in front of more than 50 people. His words, "How can I work here after seeing that message?" Think about it. One of the most acute consequences of the unbridled internet access is that businesses have lost control over their narratives. For example, senior leaders' commitment to DEI remains at 96%. However, due to the political, legal, and media landscape, corporations and senior managers have reduced external communication on the topic. Realizing, however, is that internal communication very quickly becomes external communications. General Mills CCO Jano Cabrera advises that management should be aware of the broad impact of social media as a pervasive conduit of information and misinformation, an increasingly divisive political environment, as well as the influence of consumers filtering news sources to affirm their current beliefs. Consumers not reading across the board news information, but picking and choosing what they want to hear that supports their beliefs. Such trends can significantly influence the impact of public corporate statements, especially for a retail organization. So how do we get around that a little bit? Well, there are key factors for evaluation process within the framework. So we've got the structure. It's important for companies to carefully consider each of them before taking a stance. First, one of the most important factors is to consider the company's values and mission. Companies that have a clear sense of their core values and mission are better equipped to make informed and authentic, keyword, statements on public events. Ideally, on controversial issues, businesses should focus internally, initially, on employee communications to mitigate alienating workers based on their beliefs. Second, it's paramount that companies ensure their statements are consistent with business strategy. Companies should focus on social issues that are a natural extension of the work that they do. If moral or ethical positions are implicated, leadership should make certain that aspirational statements are consistent with business practices and its mission. Third, what is the potential impact of the statement on the company's reputation and bottom line? Will the company's involvement impact the issue in a meaningful and positive way? Before taking action, companies need to carefully weigh the potential risks and rewards of making a statement. As consumers' self-selection increases, taking a stance becomes even more risky. It's also important for the companies to consider the potential impact of their statement on their employees. Employees in particular may have strong feelings about certain issues, and again, companies need to consider how that information will be received, both internally and externally. Consistency with previous pronouncements or actions is crucial to avoiding the appearance of shifting in the wind. And remember, posting is forever. Fourth, the timing and tone of corporate communications can influence how the message is received. It is important for companies to be thoughtful, deliberate in their messaging, and ensure that the statements are clear, concise, and respectful. Everybody's an interpreter. And obviously, as you well know, here in law school, you're always going to be extraordinarily careful that what you say is actually what you meant. Prudent and practical attention should be given to the platform on which they're making their statement. Social media is a powerful tool, to be sure, for a wide audience, certainly. But it's a double-edged sword, as internal messages can quickly go viral and attract both positive and negative attention. Fifth, assess your peers or competitors' actions. Who is speaking out on the issue? Should the company take the lead, or is a partnership with other similarly situated organizations better? How strong is the company's comparative influence? Particularly in the political arena, the power and influence of collective action by a group of companies with common interests often exceeds that of individual company statements. Now, that's a lot of information. And I know you're sitting there, what are you supposed to do with all of that? Let's look at two examples of well-developed, successful frameworks. Although they're very different, each business is dedicated to the health and welfare of its employees, directionally authentic, and consistently guided by their missions. Their respective frameworks reflect the analysis of the factors above that I've talked about, as well as the company culture. General Mills is an American multinational manufacturer and marketer of branded processed consumer foods sold through retail stores. Although General Mills serves a global market, it does not now have formal work sites outside the U.S. With 34,000 U.S. employees today, the company markets many well-known North American brands: Go Metal Flour, Betty Crocker, Haagen-Dazs, as well as breakfast cereals under the General Mills name, including Wheaties, Count Chocula, and they am quoting them, other monster cereals. So if anybody says what you say, you can say, General Mills has monster cereals. General Mills' structure is expedient, concise, and clear. As you can see, this one slide includes the process and the who and the how of their analysis. The Chief Communications Officer spearheads the collection and analysis of relevant data. The information is reviewed and the decision is made by the most senior leaders of the key functions, review and decision. Chief Communications Officer, Chief Human Resources Officer, General Counsel, and the CEO. Based on their decision, the board is informed of the proposed course of action and provides oversight, not approval. And from there they're able to move on. And hopefully we can too. This is their engagement criteria. I think a couple of things about these questions, because the questions are instructive. The phrasing of the questions are instructive. It reflects a reliance on internal perspectives. The current support of its decision by employees and customers is important. The leadership discussions identify the what answers as well as the how, and a balanced evaluation and weighing factors occurs in discussion with the leadership group. As Cabrera remarked, sometimes it's progress over perfection. Is there a meaningful business rationale? Is engagement consistent with our company's purpose and values? That's what we've talked about. Are the business and reputational risks manageable and outweighed by the business rationale? Are there important internal or external stakeholders supporting their engagement? And are we aware of what others are doing? Example of how this decision-making process plays out. In June 2012, the company's CEO stated internally and publicly that the General Mills opposed a Minnesota amendment banning gay marriage, stating that the company values inclusion. General Mills was the largest company to publicly oppose the amendment. The amendment did not pass. General Mills also publicly supported marriage equality when the Supreme Court issued a decision in 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, preserving the right to same-sex marriage. The company continues to receive positive feedback for its stand over this time and believes that it helped attract people to its global workplace. Medtronic is a global healthcare technology and engineering leader seeking to address the most challenging health problems for global populations with innovations that transform lives. With 95,000 plus people in over 150 countries, it's committed to accelerating access to healthcare technology, advancing inclusion, and protecting our planet. Its mission to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life is prominently displayed on most public materials. That's very important. That's very important. Now, I have to say, when we get into this, Medtronic's engineering background is on full display, okay? This is the Global Reputation Issues Management Team. You will note that in setting out the scope, they've defined very carefully where this team is actually going to do its work. And in topics where a defined Medtronic enterprise position is necessary and aligned to our values. That's an important piece. Here's the team itself, as I've reflected. Actually, the membership is reflective of every operational area in the company. And then the actions, collect and define stakeholder perspectives, and recommend the positioning and action to Medtronic leaders. So this is one of the things that's different about this is that a path, if you will, to collecting information from employees and external communities is also defined here. Thank you. The management process is longitudinal. You identify the issue, determine whether it's reputational, conduct the landscape assessment, qualitative, and we'll see that in a minute, and quantitative discussions and systems, and develop the recommendation on the engagement criteria. What's key here is that the framework leverages existing data sources covering employee sentiment and ERG inputs. Many companies that I reviewed did not reach down that far to determine what its workplace value was going to be and how they might need to be concerned about the reputational issues. Public opinion polling, media landscape, financial impact, CSR, corporate social responsibility expectations, and other intelligence. And they have to be able to do this quickly. Now, in order to do this, the quantitative, I said engineering, didn't I? The quantitative rating system for assigning categories is key. Every person that works on the decision-making process is expected to fill this out. Don't groan. You see that the criteria is very reflective of the components and factors that I mentioned and explained. And the ratings are from 1 to 5, and then a subtotal is added. Note that alignment with number 3, alignment with the company's recognition of the personal worth of employees ties directly back to Tenet 5 of the Medtronic mission, which you have all seen ad nauseum, I'm sure. An action that's in direct alignment with the personal worth of employees will determine whether or not this system will move forward. Also of interest, impact on corporate citizenship, Tenet 6. No meaningful impact, okay, no number. Action presents a moderate to positive impact on the company's presence and reputation is important, but when we get to number 5, it's a significant negative or positive impact on the company's presence or reputation. So it's a degrees of analysis as well. Within each, the purpose of the matrix is to focus and balance the potential recommendations and expected results. That's probably one of the more individually defined systems that I've seen. So, you can chew on that for a little bit. An example. On June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned the constitutional right to abortion, as well as the federal standards of abortion access established by prior decisions. On the next Monday, Medtronic was the first company to publicly address the impact of the decision by announcing it was expanding employee benefits to enable access to critical health care for our people. That's a quote. The new benefit will allow for reimbursement of travel, relocation, and legal expenses, and is in addition to coverage already in place. Erica Winkles, a company spokeswoman, said in the statement, key things, the medical device manufacturer's announcement did not mention abortion services. Did not mention abortion services. However, the company used timing, tone, and alignment with business strategy to communicate its stance on the decision. I thought that was pretty clever. The statement and approach was well received, enhancing Medtronic's brand for prospective employees. Clearly then, Making corporate statements on public events is a complex and challenging task. Companies must balance their internal culture, stakeholder expectations, core values, mission, and the potential reputational impacts on their actions. By approaching this process thoughtfully and strategically, corporations can ensure that their statements are authentic, effective, and designed to navigate this delicate balance between corporate responsibility and political neutrality. Thank you. All right. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Covered the ground.
I tried.
With respect to the functions of the board of directors, I appreciated your observation that that in the General Mills circumstances, the board is informed, but its approval or consent is not requested.
Correct. Is there a why?
I think that states it well. Do you in your survey of the corporations, how often do you find boards that are primarily employee filled as opposed to outside directors? What's the ratio of inside and outside directors in the companies that you've surveyed?
I'm not prepared to answer that question in terms of a specific number, but I can tell you that your larger publicly traded corporations tend to have boards that are comprised of outsiders, primarily. Independent directors. The smaller companies sometimes have employees or an employee representative on it. The reason I'm going to back up just a little bit about the question you didn't ask, because one of the things that we're finding now about the board of directors is that they are as nervous about making these comments and public statements as the management employees are, as the CEO is. And as we increase the diversity on the boards, you increase the diversity of opinions and willingness to take risk on the boards. So since typically your senior management leadership group is actually responsible for managing risk, the recommendation and the decision comes out of there. The family-held organizations operate completely differently, which is actually the interesting thing about Chick-fil-A. I can give you a referral to the Edelman Trust research, which may answer a bit more of your question in terms of percentages. You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Hard to predict when it's actually going to have a substantive impact. I don't think Bud Light had any idea that one little influencer was going to have the huge, and it's sort of just many statements will go by and, no consumer boycott will come about, and then occasionally there's this massive impact. How do you deal with trying to predict the...
Well, that's part of that's a good question, thank you. That is part of the reason that these matrix are put together, and the identification of what segments of your customer population is where, if you want to put it that way. Polling, paying attention to customer surveys, and that kind of information tells you, and you held it over time, and that tells you where you're moving. I don't know if any of you read the opinion pages in the Star Tribune, but I have to tell you that I found most interesting the letter that said, Target, I would just like to buy toothpaste. So there are customers who really don't, and that's what this letter set out, really don't care where your political leanings are. They just want you to do what you're supposed to do. And there are customers, however, unfortunately, that I referred to, that are going to step aside and not give a particular company their money because they equate that with supporting whatever their political interests are. So you get that wherever you can.
I have a related question,
Okay.
and it may be as much a comment as a question. So there's certainly companies that have as a plan, oh, I'm going to support position, blah, 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 in hopes of, making my employees or my customers happy or getting good PR. My sense is that even companies that are not necessarily setting out to make political statements one way or the other, in a sense, are going to be so scrutinized for so many things. What about outsourcing? Is that political? Is that business? It's kind of both. So I guess I was just wondering, for a company that would kind of like, let's say, to stay out of the maelstrom, how viable and and if you could, advisable is that? I just wanted to get your thoughts generally on that subject.
Well, that is a very good question, because you remember at some point I said, or not to address it. The problem with not addressing some of these huge questions is that then they are suspect to filling in the blanks. And it becomes more dangerous than not having said something that was consistent with the corporate values. That's why I use the word miscalculation, because it's a very difficult guessing game. And the thing that you may decide not to talk about may be the very thing that comes back to hit you. So you're absolutely right. I'm not going to say that it's a toss-up, because that minimizes too much of what all of this work that I've just showed you has done. But it is a very real difficulty. There's a saying, what's not said says a lot. And that's the concern right there.
Michelle, what does a company do once they get themselves into a bad situation? I mean, we'll take Bud Light or Target. How do you correct the situation? In Target's case, they first had the part of the population against gay pride against them, and then when they backed off, they incurred the opposition of the gay pride people. How does a company deal with a situation where they've misstepped?
Sometimes they shut up and let it, and hope that, in all seriousness, and hope that it subsides. It doesn't. Sometimes you can attempt to correct the language or correct what steps you have taken. That doesn't necessarily always work. And then sometimes that can come back to bite you. As I talked about the situation where if there was a moral or ethical dilemma and it needed to be tracked with your business strategy and how your company has been operating, because the shifting winds doesn't work. It's a very difficult situation. Chick-fil-A was interesting because they were strongly anti-gay, and yet they had diversity. And when the diversity information was presented, they got hit for that as well. You look at your pipeline, you look at if it's customers, you look at where your majority are. If there's some mitigating factor that you can use it, great. If not, sometimes you just have to sit down and let it wear out. It's an inexact science.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Something came out in the news today. Netflix co-founder and co-CEO made a $7 million donation and endorsed Kamala Harris.
Oh, dear.
The news
I hadn't seen
reports that the cancellations of Netflix just went drastically up.
Yeah.
So are you aware, I mean, two things. It makes me wonder, again, your red state, blue state companies, that really hit me hard in light of that news. I'm like, oh, is Netflix now going to become a blue company? But I guess two things. Are you aware of any corporations trying to put measures in place to influence their leaders' political donations? And might any such restrictions really prevent socially minded leaders from taking important positions or in companies?
No. Not that that's not a concern generally, but I'm not aware of any companies that have specific either matrices or metrics or processes or dynamics that can address that. The key, though, is the misstep that a corporate executive who made a personal, I'm assuming, donation. The only thing that you can do about that is make it perfectly clear that it is not Netflix. Now, the problem is people don't listen. Yeah, that's the point. That's it exactly. And the other problem is a donation of that size is going to become public. You can't hide it. The only thing that the company can do is say, this is not designed, this is a personal donation. It is not designed to sway an election or anything of that nature. There were many times before 2000s that companies made donations through PACs, for example. And that information very often did not become public. So now we've got some super sleuths that make sure that they monitor and find out what's going on, and you have to make sure that the best you can do is indicate that it is not a corporate donation. Now, there are companies, however, that will do that. And they have to stand up and say, we're supporting this for whatever reason, usually a business strategy, and that's not illegal, it's not unethical, but they pay the price, make this decision. That's why it's balancing, yeah.
Thank you.
So I just have a question regarding the board of directors. I know you mentioned that a couple times. With the board of directors, if you were ever helping a company or advising them who wanted to expand their board, is there anything that you look for or any tells or anything when you're looking to hire that board that you could see that will determine how risky or not that person will be?
Do you mean doing a background check or something of that nature to determine whether or not the person that you're considering is qualified or has engaged in some course of action that you would not want to taint your board?
Not necessarily qualification, but how risky you expanding the board and hiring that person is going to be for you and the company.
I think that's an analysis that is made every day. Hiring or bringing someone on a board is a pretty arduous process, or it certainly can be. And I am sure that in these days, when there are efforts to diversify boards, those kinds of questions have to be asked, and asked immediately and upfront. Part of the issue, of course, is that there are so many opinions and so many concerns and many reasons why people actually join boards. And very often, there's an alignment between their values or their expectations and what that is, what that board has. But that's all done internally, I think. Yeah, okay. I'll look at the boss over here. Thank you.